The rain came down sideways that November night in Charleston. The kind of rain that finds every gap in a coat and every crack in a foundation. And Adelaide Whitmore was on her knees in the foyer of Ashford Hall scrubbing a wine stain out of 300-year-old heart pine. She was 32 weeks pregnant. Her belly pressed against the floorboards each time she leaned forward, and the baby, a girl she had already decided to name Wren, kicked back in protest. Above her, a chandelier of Waterford crystal threw fractured light across the walls. From the parlor came the sound of a Chopin nocturne played by a hired pianist on a Steinway that had not been tuned since the spring. And from the top of the curved staircase came the voice of her mother-in-law, soft as silk and sharp as a paring knife. "You missed a spot near the umbrella stand, sugar. I do hope you can finish before the Ravenels arrive at 8. Adelaide did not look up. She had learned over 2.5 years of marriage and 7 months of widowhood that looking up only invited more. She simply dipped a rag into the bucket of vinegar water, wrung it out with hands that had once signed checks for the purchase of entire boutique hotels, and kept scrubbing. In her apron pocket against her hip, she could feel the steady weight of a silver pocket watch. It had been her father's. The case was tarnished now in places, smoothed to a soft gray by his thumb over 40 years. And the engraving on the back read, "In a hand that her father had carved himself with a penknife in a Montana barn when he was 19 years old. Time reveals all." She rested her palm against it for a moment, the way another woman might touch a crucifix, and then she went back to the stain. "Stay with me a little longer, because what happens to Adelaide Whitmore over the next 48 hours will make you believe in justice again. The slow and patient kind, the kind that arrives carrying a baby in one arm and the deed to a mansion in the other. If you love a story about a quiet woman who finally decides she has had enough, do me one small favor before we go any further. Tap the subscribe button below this video and ring the little bell beside it, so that when the next story finds you on a cold night, you will be among the first to hear it. Now come back with me to Ashford Hall, because the wine stain is only the beginning. The house itself had been built in 1798 by a rice planter named Cornelius Ashford, and his portrait still hung above the fireplace in the front parlor, glaring down at every guest who dared to sit on his furniture. The rice money had run out before the Civil War. The cotton money had run out by the Great Depression. What remained of the Ashford fortune by the year Adelaide met Beauregard Ashford III had been the kind of money that exists mostly in the way a family carries itself at a charity gala. The practiced laugh, the borrowed pearls, the cologne of a name that still opens certain doors in Charleston society. Beau had known all of this. Beau had hated it. He had been the one to tell her on their second date in a little oyster bar on Folly Beach that his family was a beautiful old ship that had been quietly sinking for 100 years, and that he intended to swim for shore. He had not made it. Beauregard Ashford III had died 7 months ago on a wet Sunday afternoon in April, when the brakes of his vintage Mercedes failed on a curve along the Ashley River. The state trooper had called it a tragic accident. The mechanic at the dealership had called it strange. Adelaide had been 28 weeks along when she identified the body, and she had walked out of the morgue that day with her hand pressed to her belly and a single thought playing on a loop in her mind, which was that her husband had been afraid of something in the last week of his life, and he had not told her what. She had moved into Ashford Hall the day after the funeral. Margaux had insisted. A widow belongs with her family in her time of grief. That was the line Margaux had used at the reception, with her diamond hand resting on Adelaide's shoulder like a kind benediction, while the cameras of the Charleston Society pages clicked softly in the background. Adelaide had agreed to come. She had agreed for 2 reasons. The first was that she wanted her child to know the house her father had grown up in. The second was that she wanted to find out what Beau had been afraid of. She had not found it yet, but she was close. The Chopin stopped. From the parlor came the sound of polite applause and then the click of heels descending the stairs, and Margaux Ashford swept into the foyer in a column of pale green silk with a glass of bourbon in her hand. She was 62 years old and beautiful in the particular way of Southern women who have spent 6 decades refusing to let beauty leave them, a beauty maintained by dermatologists in Atlanta and tailors in Savannah, and an iron bottomless discipline. She stopped 2 feet from Adelaide and looked down at the wet patch on the floor. Bless your heart, you've made it worse. That is heart pine, Adelaide. It is older than the United States of America. I'm sorry, Margaux. I'm doing my best. Your best, Margaux said, and she took a small considered sip of her bourbon, is exactly what concerns me. Behind her on the curved stair, Celestine Ashford had appeared in a satin robe with her phone in her hand. Celestine was 28 years old and had not held a job a single day of her life, and she filmed a great deal of what happened in the house for an Instagram account that her mother pretended not to know about. She tilted her phone now just slightly in Adelaide's direction. Mama, look, she's crying again. The pregnant maid is crying again. I'm not crying, Adelaide said quietly. The vinegar is strong. Of course it is sugar, Margaux said. Of course it is. Now I want you to take a break. You go on down to the kitchen and you tell Cordelia to make you a cup of chamomile, and then I want you to come back up here and finish this floor before the Ravenels see it. They are bringing their son. He is on the board of the Spoleto Festival. I will not have them think we live like this. She turned and was gone in a rustle of green silk, and Celestine drifted after her. Still filming, and Adelaide sat back on her heels in the empty foyer, with her hand pressed to the small of her back, and the rain still hammering at the leaded glass above the door. She closed her eyes, she breathed. She let her fingers find the pocket watch again through the fabric of her apron, and she pressed her thumb against the engraving. The way her father had once pressed his thumb against the same 6 small letters every morning before he opened the door of his first motel office in Bozeman. Time reveals all. He had said it to her on the day he taught her to ride a bicycle. He had said it to her on the day her mother left. He had said it to her on the night he handed her at 24 years old the keys to a holding company that owned 41 boutique hotels along the eastern seaboard and a checking account with 8 figures in it and a single soft instruction. Be the kind of rich nobody notices, Della. The other kind eats you alive. She had been the kind of rich nobody noticed for 8 years now. She had worn cardigans from a thrift store in Mount Pleasant. She had driven a 2011 Subaru. She had told Beau on their 3rd date that she did some freelance accounting work for small hotels, and Beau had taken her at her word and never asked another question, because Beau was the rarest sort of man, the kind who fell in love with the woman and not the ledger. She had been going to tell him the truth on their 5th anniversary. The 5th anniversary had been scheduled for June. He had died in April. Now she pushed herself slowly to her feet. One hand braced on the wainscoting, and she went down the back hall toward the kitchen, because Cordelia would have chamomile, and Cordelia would have something else as well, which was the only kindness left in Ashford Hall. The kitchen at Ashford Hall was a long low room with a brick fireplace at one end and a copper rack of saucepans above an island of butcher block. And at the stove stood Cordelia May, 70 years old, in a faded blue house dress and a white apron, stirring a pot of she-crab soup, with the slow patience of a woman who had stirred 10,000 pots in this same kitchen. She did not turn when Adelaide came in. She simply lifted the lid of a small saucepan to the side of the burner and said, "Without looking, sit down, child. The kettle is already on." Adelaide sat. The stool at the island was the only place in the house where her back did not hurt. "She's upset about the floor," Cordelia said. "She's always upset about something." Cordelia tasted her soup, considered, added a grain of salt. She is upset because the Ravenels are bringing money tonight, and the Ashfords do not have any. The kettle began to whistle. Cordelia poured boiling water over chamomile in a thin porcelain cup and set it in front of Adelaide, along with a saucer of shortbread. And then she did something she had begun to do very quietly over the last 3 weeks. She glanced once at the doorway. She wiped her hands on her apron. She leaned forward across the butcher block until her face was very close to Adelaide's, and she spoke in a voice barely louder than the rain on the window. "I need you to listen to me, Sugar. In the library last night after you went to bed, the uncle was there, Mr. Thaddeus, and the missus. They were talking about the baby." Adelaide's hand stopped halfway to the teacup. "Talking about her how?" "They were talking about the trust," Cordelia said. "The trust your husband set up for the child. Mr. Thaddeus, he said, when the baby comes, all we need is one more accident and the trust comes back to the family. He said it just like that, child, like he was reading a grocery list. And the missus, she did not tell him to stop. She did not say a word. She just poured him another bourbon." The rain went on against the window. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed. Adelaide sat very still on her stool with her hand wrapped around a teacup that was suddenly the only warm thing in the world. And inside her, low and certain, the baby kicked once, twice, 3 times, as if she had been listening to. "Cordelia." "Yes, child." "The brakes on Beau's car. The mechanic at the dealership told me they had been tampered with. He told me, and then a week later, he stopped returning my calls." "Do you think—" Cordelia did not let her finish. She reached across the butcher block, and she put her hand over Adelaide's, and her hand was old and warm and smelled faintly of nutmeg. And she said the thing that Adelaide had been afraid to say to herself for 7 months. "I think your husband found out what they were planning, Sugar. And I think he was on his way to do something about it." Adelaide did not cry. She had not cried since the funeral. She had decided on the morning of the funeral that her tears belonged to her daughter now, and that her daughter would need every one of them, and so she would save them. She sat in the kitchen with Cordelia's hand over hers, and she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way the midwife had taught her. And after a long minute, she turned her hand over and squeezed Cordelia's fingers once very gently. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do, child?" "I am going to make a phone call," Adelaide said. "And then I am going to finish the floor." That night, at 20 minutes past 1 in the morning, Adelaide sat on the edge of her bed in the smallest bedroom on the 3rd floor, the one Margaux had chosen for her, because it had no fireplace and faced north. She had locked the door. She had wedged a chair beneath the knob in the old way, the way her father had taught her on the road. She opened the bottom drawer of her sewing box, and she lifted out a folded square of muslin. And inside the muslin was a satellite phone the size of a deck of cards. She dialed a number she had not dialed in almost 3 years. It rang once. "Della. My God, are you safe?" "I'm safe, Heartland. I need you to begin Project Magnolia tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause a man takes when his life has just become considerably more interesting. Harlan Voss had been her father's lawyer for 30 years. He had been her lawyer for 8. He had drafted 2.5 years ago, on the morning Adelaide had told him she was getting married to a man who did not know who she was, a thick sealed envelope of contingency instructions that lived in a safe in his office in Charleston, and that bore on its outside in his careful hand the words, "To be opened only upon Della's word." Project Magnolia is the full file, Della. The full file, you are sure. I am sure. Begin surveillance on Thaddeus Ashford. Every account, every shell, every bank in the Carolinas and the Caymans. I want to know what he has taken and where he has put it, and I want to know by the end of the week. Quietly, Heartland. He cannot know. He will not know. And one more thing. Anything, Della. Pull the file on Ashford Cotton and Textiles. The whole file. I want to know who has been keeping that company alive for the last 5 years. I want to know the name of the angel. There was another pause. This one was different. This one was the pause of a man who already knew the answer and did not want to be the one to say it. Della, say it, Heartland. The angel investor that has been funding Ashford Cotton and Textiles since the fall of 2019 is a Delaware shell company called Live Oak Partners. Live Oak Partners is a wholly owned subsidiary of Magnolia Holdings. Magnolia Holdings is you, Della. You have been funding the Ashford family for 5 years. So was your father for 2 years before that. He set it up before he died. He never told you because he never wanted you to feel obligated. He owed old Mr. Ashford a kindness from the war, and he was paying it back the way he paid everything back. Adelaide sat on the edge of the bed with the satellite phone pressed to her ear, and she felt for the first time in 7 months something that was not grief move through her chest. It was not anger yet. It was the cold, clean ozone smell that comes into a room just before lightning strikes the field outside. Every dress Margaux had ever worn, every bottle of bourbon Thaddeus had ever poured, every Instagram post Celestine had ever filmed in the foyer of a house she did not own. All of it had been bought with money that had flowed by a quiet river her father had dug in secret from Adelaide's own hand to theirs. Heartland, yes, Della, cut the river. Slowly. I want them to feel the water drop 1 inch at a time. And I want to know the moment Thaddeus tries to move money out of the country. The very moment. Understood. She ended the call. She wrapped the satellite phone back in its muslin and slid it under her pillow. And she sat for a long time in the dark, with her hand resting on the curve of her belly. She took the pocket watch from her apron, and she opened the case, and she looked at it the way she had looked at it 10,000 times in her life, at the small white face and the slow black hands, and the engraving on the inside of the cover that her father had added at the very end, in a shakier hand. In the hospital in Bozeman 3 days before he died. Be patient, Della girl. Patient is how the river beats the stone. She closed the watch. She put it back in her pocket. She lay down on her side because the midwife had said no more sleeping on her back. And she closed her eyes and she waited. She did not have to wait long. She woke at 2:30 in the morning to a pain low across her belly that felt like a fist closing around something precious. She knew immediately that it was too early. She was 32 weeks. The baby was not supposed to come for another 2 months. She sat up in the dark and a second contraction took her so hard that she bit through her own lip. And she tasted blood and salt. And she reached for the small lamp by the bed and turned it on. Her water had broken sometime in her sleep. The sheets beneath her were soaked dark. She got herself to the door. She moved the chair. She went down the hall and down the back stairs in her nightgown, holding the banister with both hands. And she made it as far as the landing on the second floor, before another contraction folded her against the wall, and she pressed her forehead against the cool plaster, and she breathed, and she made herself walk. Margaux's bedroom door opened as she passed it. Margaux stood in the doorway in a peach silk dressing gown with her hair pinned up in a soft white cloud, and her face was perfectly composed, perfectly calm, the face of a woman who had been awake and listening for some time. She looked at the stain on the front of Adelaide's nightgown. She looked at Adelaide's face. She did not move. Margaux, the baby is coming. I need an ambulance, please. We have the St. Cecilia Gala tomorrow evening, Adelaide. The press will be on the lawn at noon. We cannot have an ambulance in the driveway tonight. You are early. First babies are always slow. You will go back upstairs and lie down, and in the morning, if it is still happening, we will drive you ourselves. quietly, through the back gate. "Margaux, please, go back upstairs, Adelaide." The third contraction hit. Adelaide went to her knees on the runner of the second-floor hall, and she made a sound she had never made before in her life. A low animal sound that came from somewhere beneath language, and Margaux looked down at her with the perfect calm of a woman watching a rosebush in a frost, and she said very softly, "You really are determined to embarrass this family, aren't you?" And she stepped back into her bedroom, and she shut the door. The latch clicked. Adelaide knelt on the runner in the dark hallway, with her hand pressed flat against the wood of Margaux's bedroom door. And she felt her daughter trying to come into the world too early in a house that did not want her. And somewhere below her on the back stairs, she heard the soft, slow tread of a pair of house slippers climbing toward her. And a familiar voice, low and steady as a hand on a fevered forehead, said, "I am here, child. I am here. I have already called the man with the Cadillac. And we are going to the hospital right now, you and me and this baby, and that woman behind that door is not going to stop us." The slippers belonged to Cordelia, and Cordelia did not waste a second on questions. She got an arm beneath Adelaide's shoulders, and she lifted with the strength of a woman who had carried laundry baskets up these stairs for 50 years. And together, they went down the back staircase one slow step at a time, while Adelaide bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out because a sound would bring Margaux to the door, and a sound would change everything. Silas Beaumont was already idling at the end of the service drive with his headlights off. The Cadillac was an old one, a 1996 Fleetwood that Silas kept in the carriage house, dark green, with the kind of bench seat that a woman in labor could lie across, and Silas had laid an old wool blanket over the leather without being asked. He did not say good evening. He did not say, "I am sorry." He simply opened the back door, and he helped Cordelia ease Adelaide down onto the blanket. And then he closed the door so softly that the latch made no sound at all. And he pulled away from Ashford Hall with his lights off until they were 3/4 of a mile down the lane. "Repère St. Francis, ma'am, or Medical University?" "Medical University, Silas, the neonatal unit." "Yes, ma'am." The drive was 20 minutes. Adelaide spent it on her side with Cordelia in the back beside her, holding her hand, dabbing her forehead with a folded linen napkin that Cordelia had grabbed from the kitchen on her way out. The contractions came every 6 minutes, then every 5. The rain had stopped. The streets of downtown Charleston were empty at that hour, the wet asphalt reflecting the yellow of the gas lamps, and somewhere on East Bay Street, Silas ran a red light, and nobody mentioned it. "She's going to be all right, sugar. I know. You are going to be all right. I know that too." She did not know either of those things. She said them because Cordelia needed to hear them said. At the hospital, Adelaide gave a name at the desk that was not Ashford. She gave the name Whitmore, and she gave a private insurance card that the registration nurse looked at twice because the card was platinum and unmarked, and routed through a billing office in Wilmington that handled the medical accounts of people whose names did not appear on hospital paperwork. The nurse did not ask any questions. She simply tapped at her keyboard and slid a wristband across the counter. And within 4 minutes, Adelaide was in a private suite on the 6th floor with a fetal monitor strapped across her belly and a young doctor in pale blue scrubs studying a strip of paper that was unspooling from a machine beside the bed. "We are going to try to stop this labor, Mrs. Whitmore. 32 weeks is too early. We can give your daughter a much better start if we can keep her inside another 3 or 4 weeks. Do whatever you have to do." The drugs went in through an IV. The contractions slowed by dawn. By the time the gray light of morning was sliding across the floor of the hospital room, Adelaide was lying on her side with one hand on her belly and the other curled around the silver pocket watch on the bedside table, and the baby inside her had quieted and the doctor had said the words holding steady, and Cordelia had fallen asleep in the chair by the window with her chin on her chest. Adelaide reached for her satellite phone. Harlan. The baby tried to come last night. We stopped it. I am at MUSC under the name Whitmore. I need 3 things from you today. I am listening. The first is a private security detail at the door of this room. 2 men. They are to admit no one named Ashford under any circumstance, even if a court order arrives. If a court order arrives, you call me before you call them. Done. The second is the autopsy file on Beauregard Ashford III. The full file. The toxicology, the mechanical inspection of the car, the trooper's notes, all of it. I want it on a server I can reach by tonight. Done. The third is harder. I need you to find the mechanic at the Mercedes dealership on Savannah Highway who serviced Beau's car the week before he died. His name is Tobias LeMay. He stopped returning my calls in May. I want to know where he is. I want to know if he is alive. There was a silence on the line. It was the silence of a careful man considering an unkind possibility. I will find him, Della. By tonight. She set the phone down on the blanket. She closed her eyes. She slept for the first time in 7 months, the deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who had finally begun to do something, instead of waiting for something to be done to her. She slept for 9 hours. When she woke, the light in the room had gone gold, and Cordelia was gone from the chair. And on the bedside table, beside the pocket watch, sat a small brown paper bag. And beside the bag sat a folded note in a hand. She did not recognize the careful, sloping handwriting of an older man. Mrs. Whitmore, the woman at the nurse's station, said you were resting and would not let me up. Please accept this small thing. My daughter was born at this hospital 31 weeks along in 1987, and a stranger brought my wife a king cake every day for 2 months. She's 40 now. She's a school teacher in Beaufort. Pass it on when you can. Signed, a friend of Cordelia May. Inside the bag was a small king cake still warm, dusted with green and gold and purple sugar. Adelaide held the bag in her lap, and she looked at the handwriting on the note, and she thought about the years her father had spent paying back a kindness he had been given in a war, and she thought about how the river of decency in this country still ran beneath everything. Very quiet, very slow, mostly underground, and how all a person had to do to find it was to fall hard enough that their knees broke through the crust. She tore off a piece of the cake. She ate it slowly. Cordelia came back at sundown with a small canvas bag of clothes she had packed at the house. She had a story ready for Margaux, who had asked at breakfast where Adelaide had gone. Cordelia had said that Adelaide had taken sick in the night and gone to her cousin in Somerville, and Margaux had been pleased by this answer because it solved the embarrassment of an unwell daughter-in-law on the day of the St. Cecilia Gala, and because it suggested that Adelaide had a cousin somewhere, which Margaux had not previously believed. She believed me, child. She believed you because she wanted to. Yes, sugar. That is how lies travel in a house like that one. They go where they are welcome. Cordelia sat down in the chair by the window with her hands folded in her lap, and she did not look at Adelaide for a long time. And then she said the thing she had come to say. I have been working in that house since I was 22 years old, Ella. I want you to know what that means. Old Mr. Ashford, Beau's grandfather. He hired me in the summer of 1977, when nobody in Charleston would hire a black woman to work the front of a house. He paid me fair. He treated me like a person. He taught Beau to do the same. When Beau was 6 years old, he used to come into the kitchen and sit on the stool you sat on yesterday and ask me to teach him how to make biscuits, and his mama would come find him and pull him out by the wrist. And old Mr. Ashford would just laugh and say, "Leave the boy be, Margaux. He is learning more in here than he ever will in there." She paused. She looked down at her hands. Beau came to me in March, child, the week before he died. He sat on that same stool. He was a grown man by then, but he sat on that stool and he said, Cordelia, I have found something. I have found that Uncle Thaddeus has been taking money out of the trust my daddy left for the baby. He has been doing it for 2 years. I am going to the lawyer on Monday. And then he asked me to do one thing. He asked me to keep the audio. Adelaide sat very still. The audio. Beau put a recorder in the library Della, behind the books on the second shelf of the south wall. He had been recording for weeks. He came to me because he was afraid of what was on it. He asked me to be the one to keep it safe. He said, if anything happens to me, Cordelia, you give this to Della when she is ready, not before. He said she has a way of getting ready in her own time. Cordelia reached into the canvas bag at her feet. She took out an oilcloth pouch wrapped in twine. She laid the pouch on the blanket across Adelaide's lap, and she said, I was going to give it to you next week. I was going to give it to you on the baby's birthday, but the baby has decided to come early, and so has the truth. Adelaide opened the pouch. Inside were 2 small black digital recorders, the kind a journalist might carry, and a folded sheet of paper in Beau's handwriting, listing dates and times. 27 of them, beside short notes that read, T&M Library after dinner, Bourbon Talk or Tea Alone Library phone call to Cayman Bank, and at the bottom of the sheet in Beau's hand, the last line he had ever written to her. Della, if you are reading this, I am so sorry I never told you the whole of me. I knew you had not told me the whole of you. I was waiting for our anniversary. I was going to ask you then. I love you. Take care of our girl, Beau. She read the line 3 times. She did not cry. She folded the paper very carefully, the way her father had taught her to fold a letter into thirds and then in half, and she placed it inside the cover of the pocket watch, behind the small black and white photograph of her own father, where it fit as if it had been measured for the space. She picked up the first recorder. She found the button. She pressed play. Margaux's voice came out of the small speaker, perfectly clear, perfectly calm. He is going to the lawyer on Monday, Thaddeus, he told me at dinner. He said he found the transfers. He said he is going to the lawyer on Monday. And then Thaddeus slow considered after a long sip of bourbon. Then Monday will be too late, Margaux. Sunday will have to do. Adelaide pressed stop. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the gold had gone out of the light, and a single star had come up over the steeple of St. Philip's Church across the rooftops, and Cordelia was watching her face with an expression that Adelaide could not read. I am going to play this once more, Cordelia. You do not have to, child. I do. She pressed play. She listened to her husband's death being planned over a glass of bourbon by his mother and his uncle on a Friday evening in March, 2 days before the brakes on his Mercedes failed on the curve along the Ashley River. She listened to the whole 30 seconds of it. She did not move. When it was over, she pressed stop again, and she set the recorder down on the blanket, and she opened the pocket watch, and she looked at her father's face inside the cover, and she said the only thing there was left to say. I am going to take everything they have, Cordelia. Everything. The house, the name. The chair Margaux sits in at the gala. The phone Celestine films on. I am going to take it slowly, and I am going to take it cleanly, and when I am done, they will have nothing left but the truth of what they did, and they will have to live the rest of their lives inside it. Cordelia nodded once very slowly. Your daddy used to say something to me, child. When I would come to him with a hard problem back when he was buying up the motels in the Carolinas in the 80s, he used to say, Cordelia, do not hurry justice. Hurry is the only thing that can spoil it. I am not going to hurry, Cordelia, but I am not going to wait either. She left the hospital 4 days later, against the gentle advice of the doctor, with the labor stopped and the baby holding steady, and a prescription for bed rest that she folded into her purse and did not look at again. She did not go back to Ashford Hall. She went instead to a small carriage house behind a private clinic on Trout Street that Magnolia Holdings owned through 3 layers of paperwork. And she set up there with Cordelia in the next room and Silas in the apartment above the garage. And over the next 11 days, she did not leave the property. 11 days, that was all it took. On the first day, Heartland came with a thumb drive. On the thumb drive was the autopsy file. The toxicology report showed a trace level of a beta blocker in Beau's blood that he had not been prescribed and did not take just enough to slow his reaction time on a wet curve. The mechanical inspection of the Mercedes showed that the brake line had been nicked, not cut, a small, careful nick that would have leaked slowly for 3 days and failed under hard braking. The trooper had marked the case closed on a Tuesday in April, after a phone call from a senior officer in the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, whose name Heartland had circled in red. The senior officer was Thaddeus Ashford's college roommate. On the second day, Heartland came with a second thumb drive. This one was the financials. Thaddeus had moved $19.4 million out of the baby's trust over 26 months through a chain of shell companies that ended at a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. The account had been opened the week after Beau and Adelaide's wedding. The first transfer had been $100,000. The last had been $700,000 made 11 days ago. The morning Margaux had told Adelaide to scrub the foyer. On the third day, Tobias LeMay came to the carriage house. He came of his own free will. He was a thin man of 42 with a grey streak in his beard and a tremor in his left hand that had not been there in March. And he sat at Adelaide's kitchen table and drank a cup of coffee that Cordelia poured for him, and he said, "Ma'am, I have been hiding in my sister's basement in Walterboro for 7 months because a man came to the dealership in April and offered me $20,000 to forget what I saw on Mr. Ashford's brake line. And when I told him no, he told me my sister's address and the name of the elementary school my niece attends. I have not slept a full night since. If you can keep my sister safe, I will tell anyone you want. I can keep your sister safe, Mr. LeMay. I can move her tomorrow. I will keep her safe for as long as she leaves. Then I will tell anyone you want." On the fourth day, Heartland filed the first papers quietly in 3 different courts in 3 different states. None of the papers carried Adelaide's name. They carried the name of Live Oak Partners, calling in a 5-year-old line of credit against Ashford Cotton and Textiles. The credit line was $47 million. The company had assets of 9. On the 5th day, Adelaide began to receive small gifts. Cordelia had told one person at the church on Calhoun Street. That person had told one other. By the end of the day, there was a casserole on the back step. By the end of the second day, there were 3. None of them came with a name. There was a quilt folded on the porch swing one morning, hand-stitched with a small note pinned to the corner that read, "For the little one from a woman whose grandbaby was held in that same NICU in 2009. We are praying for you." There was a basket of lemons from a tree in someone's backyard. There was, on the 7th morning, a single white camellia in a mason jar on the porch railing with no note at all. Adelaide stood on the porch in her bathrobe with the camellia in her hand, and she understood for the first time in her adult life what her father had meant when he said that the kind of rich nobody notices is the only kind worth being. Because the people who were leaving these things did not know who she was. They knew only that a woman in trouble was staying in the carriage house on Trout Street, and that was enough. That had always been enough. In the parts of this country her father had loved, she had simply forgotten. She put the camellia in a small vase on the kitchen windowsill. She let it stay there for the rest of the 11 days. On the 8th day, the first small success arrived. Heartland called at 2:30 in the afternoon. Della, he said, the bank in the Caymans froze the account this morning. The numbered account. 19,400,000. They froze it under the International Cooperation Statute on the basis of the audio file we provided. The funds will be returned to the baby's trust by the end of the month. Adelaide sat down on the kitchen chair. She put her hand on her belly. She said, "Thank you, Harlan." And her voice cracked on the second word, and she did not try to hide it. On the ninth day, the second success arrived in the form of a knock at the door, and on the doorstep stood a woman of about 50, in a grey suit with a federal identification badge clipped to her lapel, and the woman said, "Mrs. Whitmore, my name is Special Agent Iris Calloway. I am with the FBI White-Collar Crime Division out of Colombia, and your attorney has indicated that you have information for me regarding a homicide and a long pattern of trust fund fraud. May I come inside?" "You may." Special Agent Calloway sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours. She listened to the audio recordings. She read Beau's handwritten log. She watched Tobias LeMay's video statement, which Adelaide had recorded the day before. At the end of the 4th hour, she closed her notebook and she said, "Mrs. Whitmore, we are going to need you to keep this quiet for 48 hours. We are going to make arrests on Saturday morning. I would prefer that the family does not have warning." Adelaide nodded. Saturday morning, Agent Calloway, was the morning of the St. Cecilia Winter Ball. Margaux had been chairing the planning committee for 41 years. "I understand, Agent Calloway." "I thought you might." The agent left. The sun went down. Adelaide stood at the kitchen window and watched the light fail over the battery, and she felt the baby move beneath her hand. And she thought for one moment that she had won, that the worst was already past, that all she had to do now was wait for Saturday morning and let the federal government do the rest. She was wrong. At 47 minutes past 2 on Friday morning, the door of the carriage house came open. Adelaide was asleep in the small bedroom at the back of the house on her side, with the pocket watch on the nightstand beside her. And the sound that woke her was the sound of Silas in the doorway, very calm, very quiet, saying, "Ma'am, you need to wake up right now. We have a problem." The security camera on Trad Street picked up Mr. Thaddeus's car driving past this house 3 times in the last hour. "And Cordelia is not in her bed, ma'am. Her bed is made. Her shoes are gone. And there is a note on her pillow that says she has gone back to Ashford Hall to get something we forgot. And ma'am, the second recorder. The second recorder is not in the safe. It is not anywhere. And I think Cordelia has gone back into that house alone." Adelaide was already out of bed. Her hand was already on the pocket watch. The case fell open in her palm, and her father's face looked up at her, and the words on the inside of the cover caught the light of the small lamp on the nightstand, and she said the only thing there was to say, which was, "Get the car. Silas, get the car right now." The Cadillac came around the corner of Trad Street with its headlights off. Silas drove the way a man drives when he has been a soldier in a country he does not talk about, which is to say, without urgency and without hesitation, and the speedometer never went above 35. Adelaide sat in the front seat this time with her coat pulled over her nightgown and the pocket watch closed inside her fist. And she did not speak until they crossed the bridge over the Ashley River, and the gas lamps fell away behind them. She went back for the recorder, Silas. "Yes, ma'am." She went back because she was afraid the agents would not believe her without it. "She does not know about the federal arrests on Saturday. She does not know we already have copies. She did not have a phone, ma'am. She has never had one. I should have given her one. It is not your fault, Silas. It is somebody's fault, ma'am. I will sort out whose when she is back in the car." The lane to Ashford Hall ran a quarter-mile through live oaks hung with Spanish moss that brushed the roof of the Cadillac as they passed beneath, and at the end of the lane, the house rose out of the dark like a wedding cake somebody had left out in the rain. There were no lights on the first floor. There was a single light burning in the library on the second behind the south windows. And as Adelaide watched, the silhouette of a man crossed in front of the lamp once and then again. And then a third time, the slow pacing of someone listening. "Pull up at the carriage house, Silas. Quiet." The Cadillac drifted to a stop on the gravel. Silas killed the engine. Adelaide opened the door before he could come around for her, and she stepped out onto the wet stones in her house slippers and her coat. And she walked across the lawn toward the back of the house with her hand pressed against the underside of her belly, because the baby had begun to push hard against her ribs again, and she knew with the calm certainty of a woman whose body had begun to keep its own counsel, that she did not have many hours left before her daughter would insist on coming into the world. The kitchen door was unlocked. She went inside. The kitchen smelled of cold ashes and the lemon oil that Cordelia used on the butcher block, and on the island in the dark lay a folded white apron, Cordelia's apron, folded the way she had folded it every night for 50 years before going up to her room above the carriage house, folded as if she had stopped here on her way upstairs and changed her mind about something. Silas came in behind her. He did not speak. He simply pointed with one finger at the door of the butler's pantry, which was ajar by an inch, and then at the dim line of light bleeding from beneath the door of the library 3 rooms away, at the top of the back stairs. Adelaide moved through the kitchen on her slippers. She made no sound. She had been moving silently through this house for 2.5 years, scrubbing things, ironing things, carrying things, learning every board that creaked. She knew now which boards to avoid. She went up the back stairs one slow step at a time, with her hand on the banister and her other hand inside the pocket of her coat, closed around the silver watch. And at the top of the stairs, she paused on the landing, and she listened. The voice from inside the library was Thaddeus's, low and considered, with the small thickness of a man who had been drinking since dinner. "You are going to give me what is in your hand, Cordelia. You are going to give it to me, and then you are going to walk back down to that carriage house, and you are going to forget the last 6 months ever happened. Old Mr. Ashford left you that cottage for life. I can take it back tomorrow morning. I can put you on a curb in this city with everything you own in 2 grocery bags. Do you understand me?" And then Cordelia's voice, perfectly steady, perfectly calm. The voice of a woman who had buried 2 husbands and 1 son, and was not going to be made afraid by a man with a bourbon in his hand. "I understand you fine, Mr. Thaddeus. I have understood you since you were 9 years old, and you drowned your sister's kitten in the rain barrel and told your daddy the cat ran off. I understood you then, and I understand you now. You can take the cottage. You can take the grocery bags. You cannot take what I know." There was the sound of a glass being set down on wood. There was the sound of a chair being pushed back. "Then I will take it out of you, old woman." Adelaide opened the library door. She did not push it. She turned the knob the way Cordelia had taught her to turn the knobs in this house, with the weight of her hip rather than her wrist, so that the latch made no sound, and the door swung inward on its hinges, and she stepped through into the warm yellow lamplight of the room where her husband had been condemned to death over a bourbon 8 months before. Thaddeus was standing beside the desk with one hand raised. Cordelia was standing in front of the south wall of books, with the small black recorder held against her chest. They both turned. Thaddeus's hand came down slowly. His face did something that was not quite surprise and not quite calculation, the face of a man recalibrating a familiar problem. "Adelaide, you should be in bed. I am told a great many things, Thaddeus, most of them by people who have not earned the right to tell me anything. You are trespassing. I own the mortgage on this house. As of 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the deed transfer goes through Monday morning. I am not trespassing. You are." He went very still then. She watched the calculation finish behind his eyes. "You have nothing on me, Adelaide. I have your voice on a recorder telling your sister-in-law that Sunday will have to do. I have your beta blocker prescription from a doctor in Mount Pleasant who has already agreed to testify. I have $19,400,000 frozen in a Cayman account in your name. I have a mechanic in protective custody who watched you hand him an envelope of cash in a parking lot in April. And I have a federal agent named Iris Calloway who is going to knock on your front door at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning with a warrant for first-degree murder and 26 counts of wire fraud. He moved. He moved fast for a man of 65, fast in the way that men who have hurt people before know how to move. And his hand came down off the desk holding a brass letter opener that Adelaide's husband had used to open her birthday cards 3 Aprils running. And he took 2 steps toward Cordelia, because Cordelia was closer, and Cordelia was old, and Cordelia was holding the thing he wanted. Silas came through the door behind Adelaide. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise a weapon. He simply crossed the room in 3 long strides and put his hand around Thaddeus's wrist, and he turned the wrist in a way that was not violent and was not gentle, and the letter opener clattered onto the rug, and Thaddeus made a small surprised sound, and then he was face down on the library carpet with Silas's knee in the middle of his back, and Silas's voice very mild, very polite in his ear. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to stay just like that, please, until the police arrive. Mrs. Whitmore, ma'am, if you would be so kind as to make the call." Adelaide made the call. She made it from the library telephone, the old black rotary on the desk that had belonged to her husband's grandfather, and the dispatcher. On the other end was a woman who had once lived 3 doors down from Cordelia's sister in North Charleston, although Adelaide did not learn this until later, and the dispatcher said, "Ma'am, a unit will be there in 7 minutes." And Adelaide thanked her, and she hung up the phone, and she walked across the library, and she put her arms around Cordelia, and she held the old woman for a long time in the lamplight, while the rain began again very softly against the south windows. "I am sorry, child. You came back for me. I came back for him. I wanted him to know I was not afraid of him. I have wanted him to know that for 50 years. Margaux was on the landing when they came out of the library. She was wearing the peach silk dressing gown. Her hair had come down in the night. She looked at her brother-in-law on the floor of the library. She looked at the federal agent's card that Adelaide held in her hand. She looked at Cordelia holding the recorder. She did not speak. She turned very slowly, and she walked back down the hall toward her bedroom, and she did not close the door behind her. And that was how the police found her. 20 minutes later, sitting on the edge of her bed in the peach silk dressing gown with her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She did not resist. She did not say a word to the officers. She said one thing to Adelaide in the front hall as they led her past, and it was the only honest sentence Adelaide had ever heard her speak. "I do not know how to be sorry, Adelaide. Nobody ever taught me. I know Margaux. Will you teach my granddaughter to be sorry? When she does something wrong, will you teach her?" "I will teach her." Margaux nodded once. They led her out into the rain. Wren Whitmore Ashford was born at 11 minutes past 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon at the Medical University of South Carolina, 6 pounds and 1 ounce, with a full head of dark hair and her father's mouth and a small perfect frown on her face that she kept for the first 10 minutes of her life and then gave up. Adelaide held her against her chest in the hospital bed, and Cordelia sat in the chair by the window, and Silas waited in the hallway. And the news of the federal arrest was already moving across the local television stations on the screen above the bed, with the sound turned down, and the photograph of Margaux Ashford in handcuffs on the front steps of her own house was already on the front page of the digital edition of the Post and Courier. And Adelaide did not watch any of it. She watched her daughter's face. She watched the small frown go. She had won. She knew she had won. She felt no particular triumph about it. She felt only the slow settling weight of a thing finished the way her father had once described the feeling of the last nail going into the frame of a house he had built with his own hands in the spring of 1972. She named her daughter Wren after a small bird that had built a nest in the porch eaves of her father's first motel office in Montana, and that her father had refused to let anyone disturb for the 11 weeks it had taken the eggs to hatch and the chicks to fly. Her daughter's middle name was Cordelia. The trial of Thaddeus Ashford lasted 9 days. The trial of Margaux Ashford lasted 4. Thaddeus was convicted of murder in the second degree and 26 counts of wire fraud and sentenced to 38 years in a federal facility in West Virginia. Margaux pled guilty to conspiracy and accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 14 years in a low-security women's facility in Alabama. Celestine, who had known nothing and had recorded everything, was not charged with any crime. And she sold the rights to her version of the story to a streaming service for an amount of money that lasted her 11 months, after which she moved to Nashville and was not heard from again in Charleston society, which was the punishment her mother would have found in the end the hardest to bear. Ashford Hall reopened in the spring under a new name. Adelaide had thought about it for a long time. She had walked the rooms one morning in March alone with Wren asleep in a wrap against her chest, and she had stood in the foyer where she had once scrubbed wine out of 300-year-old heartpine, and she had looked up at the portrait of Cornelius Ashford above the fireplace, and she had said to him very quietly, "Your great-great-great-grandson was a kind man, and you would have hated that about him, and I am going to fix what you started." The portrait came down that afternoon. In its place, she hung a watercolor of a small brown bird on a porch railing. She named the house Beau's Haven. She turned the ballroom into a sleeping ward for mothers with infants. She turned the library into a children's reading room with a fire that was kept lit from October through March. She turned the carriage house into staff housing for the social workers and the night nurses, and she hired Cordelia May at a salary. Cordelia refused 3 times before accepting as the director of the kitchen, because Cordelia had been feeding the hungry in that kitchen for 50 years already. And the only thing that was going to change was the people she was feeding. The first guest at Beau's Haven was a woman named Marisol Reyes, 23 years old, with a 4-day-old son and nowhere to go, who had been sleeping in her car in the parking lot of a Walmart in North Charleston. She stayed for 6 weeks. When she left with a job in the laundry of a small hotel that Magnolia Holdings owned on Sullivan's Island, and a 1-bedroom apartment in Mount Pleasant, and the address of a pediatrician who took her insurance, and a small hand-stitched quilt that a woman from the church on Calhoun Street had left anonymously on the back step. There have been 341 guests since. The pocket watch sits on the mantel of the front parlor now, in a small glass case on a shelf where the children can see it but cannot reach it. Every morning, Adelaide opens the case and winds the watch by 7 turns of the small silver stem, the way her father taught her. And every morning she closes the case again. And every morning Wren, who is 4 years old now and has her mother's chin and her father's mouth, watches this happen from the rug by the fireplace with the serious attention of a child, memorizing a ritual she will one day perform herself. She asked last week what the words on the inside of the cover meant. Adelaide knelt down on the rug beside her. She opened the case. She took the watch out very carefully. She turned it over in her palm so that the engraving caught the morning light coming in through the tall east windows of the parlor, and she let her daughter trace the letters with one small finger. Time reveals all, baby. What does that mean, Mama? It means that nothing stays hidden forever. Not the bad things people do, not the good things either. It means that if you are patient and if you are kind, and if you keep your hands busy with useful work while you are waiting, the truth will come up out of the ground all on its own. The way a camellia comes up in February when you have forgotten you planted it. What is a camellia, Mama? I will show you. Come outside. There is one blooming by the front steps right now." She took her daughter's hand. She put the watch back in its case on the mantel. She walked out the front door of the house her husband had grown up in, and her daughter walked beside her. And the morning smelled of wood smoke from the kitchen chimney, and salt from the harbor 3 blocks away, and the green damp smell of early February in the low country. And on the bottom step of the wide front porch, a single white camellia had opened in the night. And Wren let go of her mother's hand and walked down the steps and sat on the bottom step beside the flower and put her small face very close to it and said in a voice of complete wonder, "Mama, it smells like nothing at all. I know, baby. The best ones do." Somewhere inside the house behind them, Cordelia was singing in the kitchen, the way she had sung in that kitchen for 52 years. And a young mother on the second floor was nursing a baby in a rocking chair by a sunny window. And the pocket watch on the parlor mantel was keeping time, 1 slow second at a time, the way it had kept time in a barn in Montana and a motel office in Bozeman, and the inside pocket of a man's coat for 40 years before that. And the truth, which had taken its time, had arrived. If you have ever had to be patient for justice that seemed like it was never going to come, I want to know in the comments below this video. Tell me the thing you waited for, and tell me whether it finally arrived, and tell me what you were holding in your hand the morning it did. I will read everyone. Thank you for staying with Adelaide all the way to the end. Thank you for staying with me. Sleep gentle tonight.